So it's my pleasure to introduce Alesia Zuccala from the University of Copenhagen, and she works at the Department of Communication, and she worked a lot on collaboration and invisible colleges in science. Actually, I remember your paper on that.
It's my most.
Yes, I think it's your most cited
Yes.
paper. But recently, she has worked also a lot on books and research evaluation in
Yes.
social science and humanities, gender inequalities in academia. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm really excited, and thank you so much for the invitation. So I have quite a few things that I want to clip through here. Okay, just to get you interested and involved here, how many of you in this room think that you have social capital? Do you feel like you have social capital? Yeah, some people, yeah. Okay. How many of you wish you could build more social capital? Yeah, why not? But if you, okay, well, you're not alone, okay? So, what is social capital? So it's uniformly conceptualized in terms of social resources. So resources that we get from other people that we meet in society or within our institutions. So Bourdieu was a French sociologist, and he conceptualized this in terms of class, conflicts, and power functions, as well as one's ability to advance self-interest amid social struggle. And then Putnam came along. He was an American political scientist, and he spoke about connections, norms of reciprocity, trustworthiness, how social connections are used to build and maintain a democracy. Then we had a psychologist who was also interested in sort of kind of social capital and discovered what we call the small world phenomenon. So everybody seems to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And he discovered this, that the average number of persons that we know in a kind of task would be 6. So he asked someone to get a letter across the United States from person to person, and you had to choose someone you know on a first name basis. And it took approximately 6 people to get to Stanley Milgram's friend, who happened to be a stockbroker in New York. So then finally, it moved over to social networks and social network theory, and we have Newman, who was a British physicist, and he said, well, one could in principle construct the social network, and a social network is therefore a collection of people, each of whom is acquainted with some subset of the others. So it could be represented in vertices, lines, and edges, denoting acquaintances. And from this, we got this theory of social network theory, where you have a set of actors and that roles are played in the network. So bonding roles, bridging and linking. So bridging social capital, Granovetter spoke about actors that are called weak ties, and they build bridges between other strong tie networks. So you can see that the bonding capital is the very tight-knit, highly dense, strong tie network, with usually there's one person who sort of bridges between the two. And linking is a little bit different, and it usually is referred to other organizations or systems that provide other access to resources. So some people think of social capital and social network theory as sort of being the same. They use it together, but social capital is really the lubricant or the catalyst of cooperative relations, whereas social network theory is a boundary set of actors and what is revealed as an outcome of social capital. Okay, so it's different focal points. So this would be the antecedent. This is what's sort of happening in the wild. And then this is when you do the social network analysis, you can see maybe an outcome of what is perhaps social capital. So in looking at social capital, it's a difficult subject to study. So there's I guess there's as many definitions as there is spaghetti, I suppose, and spaghetti, pasta, fettuccine, linguine. So there's very different alternative meanings depending on how it is applied and what the consequences are. Each definition tends to be highly contextual, and yet it's sort of common to the social sciences as a whole. So, but it's contextualized in each of the different social science areas. There's really no set commonly agreed upon definition, but there are kind of frameworks or schools of thought attached to social capital. And since we're at a philosophy conference, I said, well, is social capital a philosophy? So I had to think about that and look it up and do some reading. And Aristotle has said that men and women are humans by nature. We are social animals. And anyone who cannot lead the common life or is so self-sufficient as not to need to is therefore, and doesn't partake in society, is therefore either a beast or a god. And underlying this is that, as humans, we have an impulse to partner with others, whether it be through our households or through political milieus. But it's complex. This partnering and connection that we build with each other, it's complex due to speech and language. There are, of course, critics of social capital, so I cannot avoid that. And I think this is an interesting paper, which I was looking at. Is it a good concept? Because it's so often explored, very well used. And here in this, they look at 8 criteria for conceptual goodness from Gehring. So familiarity, resonance, parsimony, coherence, differentiation, depth, theoretical utility, and field utility. So again, there's also, some people say it's not a theory, some people say it's not really capital. There's a lot of critics of social capital. So that gives you the background to our study, just so you understand what we mean by social capital. And so we decided, well, we're looking at social capital and we want to measure collaboration preferences versus habits. So to do this, I had to cover quite some literature on social network analysis in academia, and a lot of it is, of course, using the network analysis maps. So what they find is that scholars with strong ties, or what you call repeat co-authorships, show a better research performance than those with weak ties. Authors who position themselves as brokers sort of have between this centrality. They tended to benefit the most in terms of citations. And this is also for every network or structure or cluster, well-positioned collaborating authors. The downside is you can visibly see evidence of structural exclusion. So that's the downside. But then we have a whole other series of research on collaboration in academia, like motives for collaboration, proclivities, collaborator roles, conditions that affect collaborative choices. So for example, Whitley says that recognition and the attainment of credibility, it's a strong motivator to collaborate. But the closest research that we found to our own was through this Trier and Molka Danielson's work, where they found that in the field of information systems, individual preferences for collaboration sort of linked to what they call evolving networks structures. So these strategic motivations were uncovered that were cognitive, structural broker focused, serendipity focused, and then also sometimes it's just to reinforce an existing relationship. So in looking at this background literature, where are we? We're sort of sandwiched in between, because we don't want to ignore the literature of collaboration, and we don't really want to work in the field of social networks and social network analysis. So our focus really is aligned with a class of research called social capital research. And we accept social networks and their features as a given, but we're focused more on this underlying mechanisms of interpersonal network. Like, what's going on? What's the lubricant? What's the catalyst? What is happening in the minds of the researchers? And in academia, researchers understand, we don't even need to mention the phrase. We know that social capital is a significant precursor to initial and continued academic success. And success can mean what? Advancing a university's mission, advancing one's career, scientific puzzle solving, becoming familiar with alternative ways of thinking. And I love this one, just being at higher risk of having good ideas. That's a great thing from social great thing to achieve through social capital. So, of course, if we're going to operationalize social capital in our own research, we thought this was a sensible and very good definition. So it's the expectations for action within a collective that affect the goal-seeking behavior of its members. So it's implying that social connections are a resource that lead to gains. There are what you call expectations and perceptions associated with this, and goal-seeking behavior. So, but we're kind of asking also, can we measure social capital? We know we can measure social networks and use social network theory, but the research is actually plagued by unresolved measurement issues. It's a concept that's notoriously difficult for measurement. The demand for empirical measures is continued to outstrip supply. So indeed, we thought, well, we need a framework at least. So we're applying this idea of social capital with this three-part framework. So social capital has a cognitive dimension where people have shared codes, languages, shared narrative. It's also a relational dimension. So norms, feelings of interpersonal trust, mutual obligation, shared form of identification, and structural also. So where you're building bridges and bonds and you're sort of linking to other organizations at a certain level to kind of gain access to resources. So finally, our research questions were, which dimensions of social capital do academics prefer when collaborating on research leading to a publication? And this was the goal-seeking behavior. And how do these preferences compare with what they actually do? And we sent out a questionnaire survey to one university population, and this was simply to keep a wide array of variables constant. And it was also a pilot test of this questionnaire. And of course, this entails different faculties, and I'll tell you more about them, and individual responses. So we asked individuals to respond to this questionnaire from the University of Copenhagen. And the demographics were, we collected demographic information, men, women, non-binary, non-disclosed. The faculties included 7, so health and medical science, science, social sciences, humanities, law, and theology. And of course, academic positions, and then of course, years active as a researcher. So we asked them about their collaboration habits. So indicate the frequency to which you engage in these habits and your level of agreement with these statements. And it sort of goes from working completely alone to, it sort of goes from geographical expansion from who you are as an individual and locally to other entities. So whether it be people from the same department, people from different faculties at the university, other university academic institutions, people from non-academic organizations. We included like businesses and other organizations, and then also universities or institutions abroad. But then we also said, we just included one question where I just think about whom I want to collaborate and publish, sort of, you know, a sort of random thing. So, and questions included preferences. I prefer to collaborate and publish research with people who share my ambitions for the research project. So from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So it was very difficult. We wanted to align our collaboration preferences with these social capital dimensions. And that means we had to think about questions that were generic enough, that weren't really specific to a certain discipline, so that everyone could honestly give an answer. So we thought, well, you can, for to a greater or lesser extent, you know, depending on whether or not you work completely alone, relate to questions about trusted competencies of a collaborator, whether or not they're going to help you meet deadlines, feedback on their work, on your work from a collaborator, or citations received after the work is published. and what your expectations would be as a result of that. So we formulated these questions, and they were sort of categorized as either cognitive, relational in nature, or structural in nature. And from our survey, we had a faculty population that we actually made an outreach to, around 7,000, and then we had a 1,092 response rate, which is 15%, which is fine. It's not excellent, but it was reasonable. The margin of error, confidence rate, all that was considered fine. Some validity and reliability testing, which included exploratory factor analysis, Bartlett's test of sphericity, Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin measure, Cronbach's alpha tests of scale reliability. So in developing the questions, we learned that some of them would improve the Cronbach's alpha if we removed question 8, question 14, questions 21 and 23. So again, it was a pilot instrument. So we've also had to get this data so we can understand how to improve upon the instrument. And in the end, we have this social capital dimensions that are what we call not mutually exclusive. And there's sort of what you call complex interactions among them. And this does fit with the framework of Napiet and Goschel. They said that these are not mutually exclusive to one another. So we have reciprocity and obligation is sort of a similar dimension. Bridging networks, links to a network, trust and familiarity, and shared understanding. So we ended up with a kind of 5-factor analysis here. Now I come to the results. So what happened with this actual survey. So with academic position and years active in publishing, there were significant differences across all habits, significant across all habits except number 7. I think about persons with whom I want to collaborate. It was interesting at faculty. So there were differences, but I guess everybody at some point thinks about who they want to collaborate with. So I guess that was, it didn't come across as being a difference. Gender, the most interesting was this significant effect at the 6th habit, working and publishing with people from universities or institutions abroad. And yeah, this really corresponds with Giovanni Abramo's work. We found that, so see if I had the, okay, so first I look at the habits here, that health and medical sciences and scientists collaborate almost as often with people from other universities abroad as they do with people from the same department, sort of thing. And here, for an example, men collaborate often or always with people from universities or institutions abroad. Women indicated often and always, but at a much lower percentage. And so that was a little more skewed towards rarely, there was fewer women that actually had that experience. So there was a difference between men and women in terms of collaborating with institutions abroad. And when we came to the preferences, so we have this kind of Gantt chart of preferences where you can see strongly disagree is sort of like really blue, dark blue, to strongly agree. And each question is coded in terms of cognitive shared languages, codes, reciprocity, shared attitude, and whatnot. So it sort of looks, when you just look at it visually, it looks very much the same. So we, of course, did the tests to the Cruxell-Wallace test to figure out if there's a significant difference at the level of faculty affiliation for these 12 preferences. We just decided to focus so much data that we had. We said, okay, let's just look at the faculty level. And the differences were when it came to who share my ambitions for the project, who bring resources from a research community different from mine, whom I know well, where we can take advantage of our different expertises, who are similar to me in my research, who share my expectations of work productivity, agree with me on the paradigm for the given research projects, who I know will comply with our deadlines, who take a different approach to research than me, and who are in regular contact with me about our research project. And this one was who will increase my citation rate and have a positive effect on my H index. So there was very significant differences at the faculty level with how they responded to these questions, also who come from a different academic background than me. Okay, so social scientists, 51% agreed that their preferred collaborators were persons who were as ambitious as they are about a research project. Health and medical scientists and scientists, 46% agreed, and 44 strongly agreed where they could take advantage of different expertises. Humanists, 40% agreed that it would be preferable to collaborate with persons who share the same ideas, views on a paradigm for a given research project. This isn't really surprising. In law, this was interesting. They have a strong preference for collaborators that are in regular contact throughout a research project. So you can see what people strongly prefer based on their disciplines. And and the humanists and theologians respectively strongly disagreed that they were not going to collaborate with people just to increase their citation rate or just so that it would have a positive effect on their H index. So then we compared habits and preferences, and we correlated the 12 most significant preferences with all 5 habits. And when we found that when academics have a habit of thinking about with whom to collaborate, it corresponds to a significant, though weak preference for sharing expectations about work productivity. So that's sort of, if you're going to think about a collaborator, they better be productive, otherwise it's not going to make sense. The row values were not strong between a preference for taking advantage of different expertises from different faculties, from other Danish academic institutions, and from non-academic organization, business, public sector. So not very strong between saying you have this preference, and yet as a habit, you don't really collaborate with someone from another faculty. So which is where you would think you would find the alternative level of expertise, not necessarily, but you might seek it through someone from another faculty, someone from another institution, or from a non-academic organization. So it's difficult, we found, to separate these internal preferences from external factors, of course, because funding agencies will stipulate the involvement of these inter-organizational or international collaborators. Measurement approaches, though, we found like this, it really needed to focus on a relevant outcome, because asking people what they think of social capital just in general was difficult, because there's so many different forms of goal seeking in academia. But we thought, well, every researcher is expected to publish. So if we set that as a goal, then they can think in terms of that. What strategy would they use to build social capital around that type of activity? We conducted this research when there was a corona pandemic and a lockdown. And so we don't know the degree to which that affected our responses. But we can only refer to other research at the time that said that there was a rise in international collaborations concerning COVID at the time. Also a predilection for more national collaborations concerning other scientific topics. So people sort of went inward and sort of huddled down into their own communities while they were at home, and maybe just had Facebook Zoom conversations and things like that. So overall, though, there is this, in academia, there's a stronger preference for determinants like reciprocity, obligation, trust and trustworthiness, and shared understandings, as opposed to other determinants like linking. So people aren't as strategic as being, we have these people that play these roles as bridges or links. And yet we didn't find that people were thinking that strategically about it. And we thought, well, why? I don't know. Academics are not really structural visionaries. They don't really anticipate their role as being a broker. So they're just, it could be because of the Corona lockdown. They were just focused on what's familiar, comfortable, what works best, what their administration demanded of them at the time, or what works best for their career goal. And that would be why they were leaning towards familiarity, trust, reciprocity, obligation, and that sort of thing. Collaboration habits with people from non-academic organizations was not a prevalent response choice, and yet they did respond to a preference for collaborators with outside or other expertise. So when you look at this, we thought, well, perhaps this kind of collaboration isn't really a preference and it's just best left to an engineered approach, or it's mainly related to funding. So there's a lot of engineered collaboration around this kind of seeking expertise. Okay, you need this expertise, you need that, and that's how you should apply for funding around solving a problem based on the collaboration or the seeking of preferences of these expertise areas. And we only found weak correlations between preferences and habits. Why? So in certain cases, it could just mean that only a few elite academics, perhaps those in well-funded research areas, were really able to manifest their social capital preferences to achieve their desired outcomes, which mean to correspond directly with their habits. Now, academics, they work in different socio-political, economic contexts, but I guess the common thing is that we do value academic freedom. And so I guess if we were to put this in a policy perspective, is that maybe we need some research policy around social capital so it's fostered, but experienced more as a kind of reward in and of itself, not like a prescribed forms of collaboration all the time, but where people have freedom to build social capital around the things that they like, and so they can discover new and alternative ways of thinking and not just seek familiar collaborators all the time, and just have a satisfaction from this type of, building of social capital. So thank you, molto grazie. We published this research in research evaluation. It's a long haul. Sorry.
Thank you very much. We have time for questions. Yep.
So thank you very much. I really liked it. And it reminded me of this work, so I wanted to ask you something, compared, maybe you know it, from Nora Hengel about scientists' good research practices. I don't know if you know it.
Yeah.
You know it, okay.
No, sorry.
Okay,
No,
I'm not telling you about it, yes.
Yeah.
So they have these super long interviews with scientists and
Yeah.
ask them what are their research practices, what do they think is a good research practice. And what they noticed is that there seems to be a very clear tension between the initial thoughts of scientists that seems to be very organized and in line with what we expect from them. And if you keep talking to them, after a while they seem to relax and they start thinking, they start giving a bit more comments about, well, actually I also did it because success and not because it was a good research practice. So I was wondering if you think that something like this could have also been a bit the driver of the result that you've shown us, because it seems that, if understood correctly, researchers do not really think too much strategically, right? So they seem to not care too much for each index of the collaborators. And I was thinking, is this maybe because they still are giving us the answers, their perception of themselves in a bit of a very idealized way, and maybe actually if we dig a bit deeper, it could be the case that there is a bit more strategical thinking behind. I don't know if you thought about these or.
I don't know. I think their preferences indicate a need for something more. Maybe they want something better. Maybe some of them. If you gave every academic the freedom to say, what would you prefer to do? I prefer to have like 1 month a year where I can go abroad and collaborate with someone that I choose. Like, why not? You know, but institutions are socio-political, you know, entities, and I found that I don't know if it was as a result of the COVID lockdown, but I thought they were just very, what do you call, traditional in their ideas about research, even in the sense that they just prefer trustworthiness, obligation. Let's get the work done. I know you well. We can speak Danish. We can, you know, that. Do you know what I mean? I got that sense that that was the most important thing, and that they weren't thinking about. Oh, they say they would prefer expertise outside, but not really. They weren't seeking it at other parts of the university or other organizations because of time, because of the lockdown. I don't know.
No, you also notice this tension between what they claim they think is important and then what they actually.
Yes, what you can do in the matter of time, and so.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think that's why at the end I thought, well, what does this all reflect? And I think it's all about academic freedom to really feel free to do what you want to do. I know the whole thing is follow the money, and a lot of collaborations that mix expertise is engineered. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks. My comment would be more on the concept of the social capital. I think that to make a optimal use of the concept of social capital, we have to remember that in Bourdieu theory, it makes sense because it's always in relation with cultural capital, economic capital, and symbolic capital, because they are closely correlated.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a rise in symbolic capital, the probability that you raise your social capital will be strong.
If you have a raise in symbolic,
if you have more
symbolic
capital,
you will raise your.
You will have more probability of extending your social capital.
Yeah.
And this will also be linked very often with the economic capital in the scientific system. I'm talking about grants.
Yeah.
About committees. So it's not something to be seen as an essence in itself, because this transforms. For example, you can have a very large social capital network, but if you get caught in a fraud, it disappears instantly. So social capital is hard to structure, but it's easy to disappear. As opposed to cultural capital, which once you know quantum mechanics, you won't forget it. Once you know art, history, it's cultural capital. But cultural capital is not social capital. Social capital is very relationship and inseparably linked in the scientific field with economic and symbolic capital. So in the exchange or in the to try to understand how they would like to extend their network and their relationships, I think it's linked to, and you mentioned it, it's also linked to their actual position in the field. Those who are in a very low position, few papers in important journals and not much grants, they will have expectations about relationship in the future that may be quite different from what, as you said, that they have in practice.
Yeah.
So they can dream of a lot of stuff, but the probability of actualizing will depend on the structure of the capital and not on the volume, because you can have a lot of economic capital in society, but very few social capital. And the last point about social network theory, from the point of view of sociologists, it's not a theory, it's a method. It can be applied in economic sociology, it's applied in STS also. It's a methodology. And to understand the networks that the social networks gives you access to. You need sociology of family, because there's a lot of work in social networks about the time evolution of networks, yeah, among students. When they get married, the structure of their social links change completely because now they have children, they stop meeting people because they move in time. So it's a pure methodology. It's not a theory in the sociological sense. There's no theory of social networks.
Well, I thought that's how all the bonding, bridging, linking,
Yeah.
what these roles are as part of the theory. I think that's the theory of social networks, but you're correct in saying that you can use social network analysis and apply an outside theory from another field. I think. So long.
Any other questions? I have a question on my own, actually. In terms of collaboration, I think that there are some differences between disciplines because of the socio-systemic status of different disciplines. I mean, so if I work in high energy physics, I don't really have a choice whether to collaborate or not, because from the start as a PhD student, I'm already within a research collaboration network. Whereas in philosophy, you have much more freedom to decide whether to collaborate or not because of the kind of knowledge you produce. You know, also in large medical trials, then you don't really have a choice to collaborate or not because you must collaborate. Whereas in the humanities, in fact, you have much more freedom. So I was wondering whether you could, I mean, you have also divided results by faculties. If you can.
Well, we did, there was so many analyses that we did, furthermore, like years of active in publishing. And so we've broken it down. I just showed you sort of a few things of the analyses. I don't know, I think you're right. Like, so structurally, when you become a member of a scientific lab, of course, you're going to be part of the team already. But what if the team has a grant in collaboration with another physics unit in another country? Maybe the postdoc is borrowed from that other lab in that other country and joins that team. So in some sense, they're bringing with them some expertise capital into that new lab. So yeah, they do mostly work together, but now the problems that they solve are sometimes with different labs, for example, across Europe. So I'm not sure if they always work only as a team anymore all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, because follow up. There is some interesting work in history and philosophy of science on understanding what are the epistemological factors that lead to collaboration. I mean, historically, we focus a lot on these strategic reasons, but it's true that some kind of knowledge can be produced only in collaboration.
Yeah.
Think about the multi-messenger astronomy, where you have to collaborate with different observatories around the world, people working with electromagnetic waves, other with gravitational waves, and they must collaborate in order to produce the epistemic outcome. It's something that is structurally collaborative. Whereas in other areas, the kind of knowledge you produce apparently doesn't need people to collaborate. So, I mean, I think interesting dimension to consider.
Yeah, I mean, there were some correlations between I work alone and therefore I don't, we allowed them to say, I just work alone. And so you had the right correlation with the habit, I work alone, and I don't sort of care about any of these social capital preferences. So there were high correlations between that as well. So it's sort of like, what was the significant differences in preferences, and do they meet habits? And it was the whole thing was really difficult, but enjoyable in a sense to say, can we construct an instrument around this framework, around these dimensions? That was also part of the task, is to pilot the instrument, maybe not so much even focusing on the results, but say, is it possible to construct an instrument? But I do sort of agree with Eve in that we didn't, it would be interesting to add things like cultural capital, symbolic capital. What are the dimensions of those as well? Because we just focused on the main ones, cognitive, structural, relational, you know?
The economic one, grants. You get grants.
Yeah, but we,
You get money.
yeah, but we didn't ask that question. So we didn't say that, like, so it's like, we asked them, what would you prefer? And, you know, be honest about it, like, you want somebody, because even if you get a grant, you gotta hire somebody to work with you, a PhD student or something, and you're like, well, I just want them to get the work done. You know, that could be a preference, right? Trust, I trust them, they have an obligation to fulfill, and reciprocity, that's a major part of it, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Oh, Lucas, please.
So first, thank you very much because this is very useful for my research. So
Oh,
and then I had a question which is, I guess, kind of related to you, which is basically what people want to get via social capital, because capital is something you want to convert usually. And so I would be super interested to have sort of measures of, yeah, what people want to get with it. So for instance, in my case, I can imagine I want to get collaborations because I need data, to which I don't have access myself.
that was the goal seeking, then
Yeah.
you can look at social capital around that particular
Yeah.
goal, I would assume.
Yeah, or like I want to have access to computational resources or
Yeah.
to specific expertise. And so I just suggestion which would be to look into what, you know, material resources or, you know, specific knowledge people want to get via collaborations, because I can imagine in some field, you know, having access to data is a major stake, and it's a huge driver of, you know,
Yeah.
collaborations. And so, yeah, if you know about research in this direction or planning to do.
Well, actually, I agree with you, and in fact, but that sort of limited, because we did it all across faculties, it limited the kind of questions we could ask, like, because I need data, we weren't sure, like, maybe some of the theologian people or the law people, I don't know, I mean, we assume everybody wants data, but maybe, you know, so you had to ask questions that expertise outside, or bring resources from their community, general questions. But if we did social capital, you could do it in a field where you really refine and honed in what are the practices, what are the habits, and how do they think of social capital within that field?
Yeah, and if I may add, because this is what, when we look at like social network analysis, we miss the drivers of, you know, what.
That's what I
structure.
thought,
And
yeah,
so
we don't, yeah.
To answer this specific question, your approach would be great, actually. That would
Well,
be
thank
great.
you, thank you. I thought so, I mean, I love the social network research, I think it's good, but it's after the fact, right? So you can't really assume how social capital was used or built. Maybe somebody accidentally just became a link or a bridge and they don't know why, right? And I thought that's why they never really seem to be strategically thinking about that in terms of their preferences.
That was the.
Okay.
If there are no other questions, then let's thank again Alesia.
Thank you. Thank you all.